It's James again from RedMonk. We're here to talk about the role of observability in day zero operations. So look, it's pretty straightforward that in 2024, we're in a world where stuff is more complicated in terms of what we're rolling out. We are constantly trying to continue this move to deploying applications more quickly. Infrastructures are more complicated than ever. And so basically the challenges for the enterprise are more substantial than they've ever been. We've had a big period of sprawl, frankly, where we've had a lot of choice in terms of developers and engineering teams and decisions they make, which has led to a lot of productivity, but also some challenges in terms of, again, this complexity in terms of environments, databases, monitoring tools. Across the board, there has been a sprawl. What we're seeing in 2024 is much more of a move to trying to establish platforms and platform engineering teams to try and reduce some of the cognitive loads on developers and some of the organizational burdens on engineering teams. So these are some of the things that we're trying to get a handle on. And today, I've got some folks to talk about that. And so, Adrian, over to you. Observability and day zero operations. What do you mean by that? And what do you think that the enterprise needs to be bringing under consideration?
Yeah, thank you for having us on, James. So I'm Adrian Phillips with Dynatrace, and I'm in the product marketing organization. And we have the opportunity to meet with a lot of our customers, to understand a lot of the trends that are sort of going on in their environments and challenges that they're facing. And at a time, monitoring was sort of thought of as maybe something that you'd bolt on at the end, a nice to have, something that wasn't maybe considered critical. And what's been interesting to see is not only is observability now essential, not only is it helping organizations get from that reactive to proactive state, they're thinking about it. The leading organizations are thinking about it earlier and earlier and earlier. It's no longer just a day two operations thing. While it absolutely is a critical and essential part of day two operations, we've got some of the leading organizations who are thinking, okay, day zero, while we're sort of planning this out, how do we figure out with the end in mind? How are we going to be able to get to the answers, have full visibility, telemetry within our hybrid and multi-cloud environment? And so now starting to bake observability in those tools into the environments that the developers themselves are using. At one time, there was that trend, and I think we'll get into it here a little bit today, where developers sort of had to circumvent IT, in order to be able to be productive and stand up their environments and get things done. And then from that, they would choose their own tool, whatever they were most comfortable with. And now we're at a shift where we're seeing SREs trying to figure out, well, how am I going to actually support, hundreds, thousands of these applications? And so we're finally seeing a shift in the environment where observability, along with other practices, are being considered as a part of day zero. And I'm curious, is that consistent as well, James, with what you're seeing with your clients and in the market?
Yeah, 100%. It's become more and more clear as frankly development and production have moved ever closer together, which creates opportunities in terms of moving faster. It creates responsibilities in terms of more testing and more requirements to ensure that what you're actually rolling out is not going to break things. But pretty clearly, in order to understand the behaviors of the system, you need to be thinking about observability from, as you say, day zero, rather than something that we add after the fact. Just in order to have a feedback loop, that's certainly what we've seen from organizations. I mean, this stuff, ever since we started moving to agile development, ever since we started to be thinking about making multiple production deploys per day as opposed to perhaps per year, we've really needed to think to increase the value of observability in order that we have better visibility into what we're rolling out, how we rolled it out. So yeah, no, I mean, the organizations that we see today that are successful are certainly making observability a tier one citizen in terms of the set of disciplines that they need to consider when building applications and rolling them out to their infrastructures. But Angela, perhaps you could fill us in on what are your customers actually doing in this space?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for having us on. Also, I'm Angela Kelly, also on the product marketing team at Dynatrace, and happy to be here today. Similarly fortunate that we get to talk to a lot of customers. As you know, James, I'm sure, platform engineering as a discipline is still relatively early in maturity in the development of the discipline and actually being adopted among organizations. And we see that in our own customer base, kind of that range of maturity levels. But what we do see in common across those things are a few things. One, I think, is that observability at day zero really not only is it a requirement, but it actually enables organizations to modernize. So without that visibility, organizations can't really even know where they're going to go, and now they can, which is awesome. And that's something that we hear from a lot of our customers. And there's really kind of three problems I think that organizations are trying to solve with platform engineering. One is really around tool sprawl and the issues that that's bringing up. Two is really around the lack of, or kind of the maturity stage that DevOps is at, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. And also scalability challenges. So just to touch base a little bit deeper on each one of those, as it relates to kind of tool sprawl, the impact of organizations having too many tools and the lack of standards that results in that. So again, if you have a handful of applications and application teams with DevOps teams built in, maybe it's not as big of a deal. But now as organizations are becoming more and more digital, like every company is a digital company today, right? And now you have hundreds and thousands of application teams. It becomes just unreasonable to even try to think about managing from a tech perspective. It's a tech stack, but there's even variations within the tech stack. And so now everyone has to be an expert on everything. And security is like impossible. So not only, then you have the cognitive load, but it becomes very inefficient and extremely expensive really, really quick. Observability kind of helps you cut a lot of that in kind of that visibility that our observability tools can give you can really help address a lot of those problems. The second around kind of DevOps maturity and that high cognitive load, again, the evolution to platform engineering, and I do think it's an evolution forward when platform engineering is done right, provides organizations to do kind of a new way of working. And so if you can have the standardized tools, like a standardized observability tool, where all your information is in one place, and you do have metrics, traces, and logs and business events in one place, now you can start to become agile and efficient, both with the way you use your resources and your team. So maybe you don't have to use logs for everything. Now you can start to use traces for some things and logs for some things. And you have all these tools in a toolbox, and you can start using them for the right things and start to get traction. And that's really where you can start to enable your development teams to really do what they do best, which is innovate and build applications. And then the third is really around scalability. I think as organizations are adopting infrastructure as code, which is becoming very standard and common, again, you kind of need the ability to scale. And when you don't have that standardized technology and you don't have visibility kind of across all of your solutions, the silos of data just start to break down and it becomes really difficult. So that's kind of what we're hearing across a lot of our different organizations and customers. I'm curious to kind of get your take, because the evolution, I've also heard some companies sort of say, are we going back, to 25 years ago, or are we really moving forward? And I, curious to get your thoughts on that too.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the things is that frankly, IT is a pendulum, and we move forward with some things. It's like the shift from distributed to centralized computing or things like that. And the simple fact is that yes, we do implement, re-implement, rinse, and repeat. This happens again and again. But if we look at the ability of organizations, again, what are we doing here? We're deploying applications. If we look at the ability of organizations to deploy applications and changes more rapidly than they've ever done, that is undoubtedly the case. Now, look, do we want to go back to a world where you've got like a change board that people have to request every change that is made before it is rolled out? Do we want to move back to those sorts of disciplines that slow everything down? No. But on the other hand, are there some things around, again, we've talked about standardization of environment a fair bit, and guardrails, having some controls. are those things that have a value? Maybe they had a value 25 years ago. They have a value today. Also, there are some questions about the zero interest rate phenomenon, right? Or phenomena. So if we're going to throw money at people and always be hiring the best people, and with all of these questions, about sort of competition for talent and so on, 100%. Let's throw money at the people and let them solve the problems. But I think today organizations are much more concerned. They're in a more cost-cutting mode, and they are thinking about, hang on a minute, maybe we can't find so many of those what we might call full stack developers. Maybe we can't find people that have all of the experience in all of the environments. And we do need to not just standardize the stacks, but standardize the skills. And so successful organizations today are I really do think they are thinking about, hang on a minute. Some of those, here's a good example. When the cloud kicked off, there was a lot of talk about, we don't need to do capacity planning anymore. Great. Okay. Capacity planning is done. We'll allow the cloud to do that for us. There is not a single organization on the planet today that is not trying to reduce their Amazon, Google or Azure spend. And they're actually thinking about capacity planning being back. And we said, we don't need load testing anymore. Well, clearly that is nonsense. You can't rely on the cloud to solve and paper over all of the problems for you. So what's, I guess, old is new again. Standardization and thinking about having an organization that is there to ensure that application teams are more effective. If that's a 25-year-old idea, then it's still an idea that is extremely relevant today.
Yeah, I love what you're saying, James. I've got a few good examples that I'd love to pepper in as well, in the spirit of sort of giving practical examples. I was talking with a customer yesterday, and they were talking about how they're able to use Dynatrace to lower the learning curve so they can accelerate their DevOps transformation. I really loved how he was talking about that, by having that standardized practice, it actually is up-leveling their entire DevOps organization, and specifically their developers as well, being able to catch things earlier, shifting left, doing that automated testing as they are working that into their workflows, into their pipeline. I thought that was really cool. But I'll tell you another example that really stood out to me. And we had Dell speak at our customer event. And what was fascinating about that is they were coming at it from the perspective of the developer experience, and they were recognizing that when they did the poll and they did some research with their teams and figured out that the time that they spent being productive was really low, surprisingly low, to be honest. But I bet a lot of folks on this webinar would identify that actual time of productivity was in the 30%, while they were writing code, adding logic, writing logic, which will add value to the organization. They were able to get the time spent on productive tasks up into 83%, up into 80%. And so how did they do that? By focusing on the developer experience. So they already had a self-service portal, but they were in the process of trying to standardize all of that and simplify it. So there was literally nothing else for the developer to think about except to request their integrated development environment and just go to work. And so within 2 minutes, they request it and off it goes, and they're ready to roll. So not only did that, as we're talking about here, eliminate or remove the cognitive load from their developers, they don't have to think about tools, and they don't think about how am I going to get to my logs or my traces or understand how my application's performing. It also has an amazing downstream effect. So now, the SREs aren't trying to retroactively establish patterns that they're going to be able to use to scale across their environment. But now there is a consistent way that everybody in the organization goes about their work, which obviously is going to have huge impact, on business outcomes as well. So I thought that was a fantastic example. And I think you've sort of talked about too, the developer experience gap. I'd love to kind of hear your thoughts on that, and help us understand how you sort of articulate the developer experience gap.
Yeah, I think that's really well put. So the developer experience gap is just something that we were noticing, where I described this already as sort of sprawl. There was this freedom of opportunity that developers enjoyed to choose their own tools. And And that's great. You get to choose your own programming languages, you get to choose your own databases, caches, and so on. Cloud environments. That's great. Choice is an attractive thing, but it also really does bring an overhead. And particularly for developers were told, have at it, go and build this thing. But then they were also told, by the way, you have to manage the thing. And so there's sort of an aspect of like it's like the puppies for life, not just for Christmas. And what would end up happening is that the developer team would end up having to become a specialist in managing an environment that was not the application. It was, perhaps again, some open source monitoring tools. We've seen this again and again with open source in particular. It's great. It's highly accessible. I could just go take some code from GitHub, deploy it to a cloud instance, and away I go. But over time, you found, and the developers were just finding that they were having to spend more and more of their time managing the applications and less time building the applications. And that's not necessarily where developers wanted to be. And I think that gets back to this sort of specialization of role that I was talking about. The developer experience gap it's sort of a paradox. The freedom is great, but if having all of these tools means that you have the responsibility for building all of the integrations, you don't have standard integrations, you got to build them all yourself, doing all of the care and feeding of the system, that isn't actually good for anybody. It's not good for the organization, nor is it good for the developer. And that's what we mean by the developer experience gap. And so, yeah, I mean, that's something that we've seen, certainly organizations being much more cognizant of and trying to address with the things we're talking about, platform engineering and so on.
Yeah, I love what you're saying, because there was something that Dell talked about. They talked about exactly what you said, is shift left is important, identifying issues earlier before they get in production, all of the value there. But you're spot on with there's that, now I have to be an expert. And Dell talks about shifting down, being able to get a lot of that expertise into the platform so that the developers don't have to be making those decisions. So shifting down to help or to eliminate, the cognitive load of the shifting left. I thought that was a fascinating way of thinking about it.
Yeah, no, it does make it honestly makes a great deal of sense, because I say we've seen it again and again. New platforms arrive, and at first everyone's like, "Oh, this is great, I love this," but it doesn't take long before it's like, "Wait, so now we've got 4 people, on the monitoring side." You're building your own thing, and you pull down the stuff that open source. You might be using Elastic or something like that, and then suddenly you've got like 40 people working on that, and then you've got like 50 people working on that, and you're like, wait, is this good? So I like, shifting down. I think that would appeal to a lot of organizations. So Adrian, developer productivity, it seems like something that you're thinking about more and more, your customers are thinking about more and more. So what's next?
Yeah, I think we have a lot of good stuff we would love to talk about, but we'll save some of it for the next discussion. Best practices. I mean, I think we're talking about finding that right balance between being able to move nimbly, move quickly, be agile, but also being able to manage the risk within the environment and addressing all of that. So, we're looking forward to jumping in and getting a little bit more into some of the ways you can leverage Dynatrace and some best practices in order to improve the developer experience and developer productivity. Angela, is there anything you'd like to add for that topic?
I don't think I have too much to add. I think Adrian covered most of it. But yeah, I think, with a lot of the platform engineering disciplines, and the more that we kind of see that Dynatrace is doing a lot to start to enable platform engineering teams to mature within the organizations, both across our products and services and what we're doing, with some of the cloud native solutions like Kubernetes observability and the automations, technical solutions. So hopefully we'll get a chance to talk much more about that. But all of those things, the end goal is really around helping organizations manage cost, more efficient and effective resources, better scalability, and at the end of the day, more productivity. And obviously, if your developers are happy, hopefully at the end of the day, your customers will be too.
Awesome. So I think that's what we're flagging. There is going to be another show. I mean, the simple fact is with Dynatrace, they may not have come out of a world where observability was day zero operation, but that's certainly where they're going. They're getting closer and closer to the developer, and we're going to be talking more about that in a show soon. So thank you both for joining us. Thank you all for joining us. Any questions, put them in the comments. Would love to know what you think. And if you've got any stories about how observability could prevent some of the kinds of problems that we've had, I'd love to hear from you. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for having us, James.
Thank you, James.